Hello my dear friends, how's it going? Welcome, I'm Mari Theriger and today I'm here to talk about the 18 spells or the song of 18 spells found within the poem Hávamál, of which I have spoken of on a previous video, where I have stated that the Hávamál is the only religious text to have survived that shows a pre-Christian Nordic pagan religious content. And if you haven't watched that video, and if this statement might come as a surprise, please do watch that previous video for more information on this subject. I also consider the Hávamál to be the only surviving text of such a cultural, geographical, and temporal reality that not only shows a religious approach, but also a philosophical mindset. However, there's something very interesting, within this poem, which bears the only mention of Odin's sacrifice to obtain the knowledge of the runes and magic charms, and along with it, there's a presentation of 18 spells, which I would like to present here today. There's been a considerable amount of questions, mostly from the part of my patrons, of course, concerning these spells, mainly if they are a reference to the runes. So each stanza could belong to each rune as some sort of spell or incantation or a magical aim of each rune. However, this is not a rune poem, and it is not likely that we are in the presence of spells using the runes, but rather magical songs, incantations, more under the scope of magical charms, as in short phrases whose aim is to express a magical intention, possibly through song. There's been several attempts to link these 18 spells to the runes, but if we look into the Elder Futhark, there's a total of 24 runes, so 6 would be missing. If we look into the runes for some answer, 18 spells would be closer to the younger Futhark, and that makes a little bit more sense given the time period, which is a total of 16 runes, so 2 were missing, which is why much later in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Guido von List comes up with a new row of runes, the so-called Armenian runes or Armenian Futhark, which are 18 pseudo-runes which had a great influence on German modern mysticism and occultism, especially in the 20th century, and to this day still some weight, unfortunately, on modern esotericism, despite being quite the recent invention, complete fantasy, and the great majority of everything involving these pseudo-runes is not based on anything historical. But von List has had this approach to also create these 18 runes, adding 2 more to the younger Futhark in order to forcibly link it to the 18 spells within the Hávamál, but we shall get to that later on in this video. Now, about these 18 spells, sadly, there's little concrete evidence of what they truly are and what they refer to. Those who have written, compiled, and recorded these sources were often Christians. The good aspect of this is that some glimpses into the Nordic pagan past were recorded and preserved till our days. The negative aspect of this is that it is highly unlikely that Christians understood what they were recording, so there was neither an understanding that they were possibly recording pagan rituals, nor was the wish to actually record that when it was understood or perceived as pagan rituals. So the information is quite inconclusive, strange, or unintentionally cryptic. Now, before we get into it, 2 important things, at least to me. On the last video where I have shared with you that I am no longer an archaeologist, as I said in that video, I know a lot of people do care about me and genuinely want to see me happy. Once again, to my very happy surprise, it's actually a lot more people than I thought. I always try to read all the comments and reply to as many as I can. Over 200 comments in less than 24 hours, that's something. Everything I read was you guys cheering me up and showing your love and support and friendship, and it was amazing. And well, words, lack of words, sorry. It's hard to wrap my head around such good feelings. I'm not used to live that, I'm not used to accept it given my mental state practically all of my life. But obviously I'm really grateful, and I do want to accept your love and support. I really want to accept it in here. It really is something else out of my own world. Thank you so much. Also, I would very much like to dedicate this video to someone who is very special to me quite recently in my life, on many levels, let's say. And she has been very good to me, and I'm quite happy to have met her, and also very happy we are developing our relationship, as it gives me quite a lot of happiness and hope. This video is dedicated to you, Law, among many things, including spiritually wise, absolutely amazing with the runes and witchy stuff. This one is for you, love. So here we go. As said in the previous video, in stanzas 138 and 139 of the Eddic poem Hávamál, we have the only known description of Odin's ordeal in the great tree Yggdrasil. For 9 nights the god was hanged, fasted and wounded with a spear in a sacrifice to himself. This sacrifice results in obtaining the occult knowledge of the runes, perhaps in reference to both to the transcendent mysteries, but also to the characters themselves. Soon after, in stanzas 140, 9 spells are mentioned that Odin learned from his maternal uncle, spells that we don't really know what they are and which ones they were. Then, between stanzas 146 and 163, we have a list of 18 spells. Now, the first spell is about assistance in the face of accusations and in case of anxiety. We could say that this first spell, or rather charm, right, could be called help, which provides aid in any moment of strife or grief and of deep sorrow. Unfortunately, this charm is not elaborated on, nor the actual aid that is given and how. Seems to be a reference to a charm to calm the mind, possibly in moments of overwhelming emotional turbulence. So I can see why it isn't hard to think about runes or a specific rune that might do the trick here. After all, this comes soon after Odin's sacrifice and how to paint and carve the runes. But again, in these 18 charms, no runes are actually mentioned, and it's more likely that we are in the presence of charms, specific spoken or sung words, as incantations for a specific effect. Something possibly quite similar to this we find in the Mesoburg charms or incantations, 2 medieval magic spells written in Old High German. The first spell is a Losungsegen, sort of redemption blessing of sorts, in which the last 2 lines are the magic words themselves. The second incantation is to heal, and the incantation itself is there, and it is an incantation whose mythological component is connected to Woden, the equivalent of Odin, right? But unlike these charms, each of the 18 charms within the Hávamál do not present the magical words, the incantations themselves. It only speaks of their existence and purpose. So, reading the Hávamál, we don't actually have the words to apply the charm. We only know of the existence of 18 spells that must have been quite popular and used the most, maybe. We end up having a reference to 18 aspects of life that troubled people the most, and the first one seems to be in reference to anxiety. The second charm is aimed at, or makes reference to healers to sing, to heal the sick, right? Aimed at providing healing to sickness of the body and quite possibly to physical pain as well. Now, the third and fifth charms are quite identical in terms of providing invincibility against weapons, which is also valid for spells 11 and 13, as we shall see further ahead, which provide protection in battle. So, the third charm is to make the weapons of enemies completely incapable of inflicting harm. The fourth charm promises freedom to captives, dropping their bonds or shackles, much like the first Mesoburg charm as we have seen. The first charm, the fifth charm, as was said, is very identical to the third, but more like to alter the course of an arrow. So, in other words, is also to stop a weapon from inflicting harm. The sixth charm is quite interesting as it is a charm of protection. I would say a counter hex or counter curse. It speaks of runes carved on the root of some tree, possibly a young tree's root, as a curse. So we actually have the mention of a sorcerous act, a lot more pragmatic, but we don't know exactly what the curse is, but we get an idea of runes being used as a curse. And the charm itself, whatever words might have been uttered or sung, it allows the person to send back the curse, turning it into a magical attack of sorts back to the person that sends the curse. So it's basically a protection charm. The seventh charm is similar to the ninth charm turned to natural elements. In the case of the seventh, is to calm down or to put out fire with a song. The eighth charm is quite similar to the seventh and ninth, the use of song as well, to calm down, only in this case not towards natural elements, but to calm or settle down dispute, to ease feelings of hatred, rage, and violence. The ninth charm, as was said, similar to the seventh, to calm down sea storms, to calm down the elements. In this particular case, it is to save one's ship or vessel in a stormy sea by calming down the wind and soothe all the sea to rest. And this particular one is quite curious and in a way goes in line with the type of magic, type of charms Scandinavians would buy from Finnish wizards, as it says in the written sources, of course. I've talked about it on the video concerning talismans in Old Norse witchcraft and the type of knot magic, which consists in binding the wind, and each knot released sends a gush of wind. Each knot represents the intensity of the wind, so every time a knot is unbound, a stronger wind is released to be used at sea for fast travel. So it's more of the opposite of this ninth charm, which is to calm the wind, right? But still wind magic here represented. However, I think it's far more related to Sami magic than by a Noaidi, a shaman of the Sami people. In sources here spoken before concerning Seidr, as literally through chant or song, galdr, to have control over the wind, to either augment its power or to soothe it in order to bring home safely the person navigating on sea waters. The 10th spell or charm appears to aid extracorporeal projection, in which an individual invisible or invisible form, animal or otherwise, travels or inflicts damage. It is a spell, a charm, against persons that are also capable of doing that, witches and possibly supernatural beings with the ability to change shape. And the enchantment or the charm means that when the witches fly, that is, it is believed when they project themselves, they are prevented from returning to their bodies, as if the thread that keeps them connected to them was cut, causing their minds to become lost and dissipate. This is something quite interesting here spoken before concerning the fylgjur, which in many literary sources is also alteration of shape into animal form, turned into a fetch or a familiar, or send out a mind emissary in the form of an animal to seek out something, fetch something, or to cause harm, to steal or to spy on, curse, a variety of things. Something we also see in Sami shamanism, but usually sending out a gandur or a gandur, either one's mind in animal form or a magical projectile. I've spoken about this in more detail in previous videos, and frankly, I'm sorry, so many of them that I have frankly lost track. So if you please go into the folder of Nordic studies in this channel and look for subjects such as Nordic witchcraft, Seidr, supernatural beings, parts of the soul or the self, Galdr, Vardlokur, helping spirits, shape-shifting and such themes, and you will find information about all of this and much more. The 11th charm, as was said before, is similar to the 3rd, 5th, and 13th charms as a blessing given to the warriors before battle to ensure that they will be victorious and get out of conflict unscathed. Protection from harm, from the violence of conflict and war. The 12th charm is quite peculiar, which brings together characteristics or characteristic aspects of Odinic action or behavior and gives the power to, with engraved and painted runes, that is, gives power to revive the corpses of hanged men, allowing them to move and speak. This is something quite characteristic of Odin, again spoken here before. For instance, in the poem Voluspo, we have such a case of necromancy, that's what it is, where Odin wakes up a dead Cirrus, and so she speaks the knowledge of the grave, the knowledge of the dead and of the underworld. She speaks of past, present, and future events. I mean, in many cultures, the dead are often seen as bearers of secrets, mysteries, ancestral knowledge, as well as prophecy. The whole act of necromancy originally, of course, was literally to speak with the dead as a form of augury, to prophesy. Odin, in particular, in a few sources, carves runes and puts them in the mouths of the dead so they may speak again. Those runes are called málrunar, speech runes. The 13th charm is, again, another blessing, another form of protection against harm, but a blessing bestowed upon a child presumably soon after a child is born. So it kind of reminds us of baptism actually, obviously. And such a blessed child will never fall in battle nor be slain by the sword. Now, moving to the 14th charm, it is to identify the names of elves and gods. It seems to me that that's to be used when they are among humans, implying a certain disguise of supernatural entities to walk among humans. And this charm would then possibly detect non-humans, uncovering their identity. The 15 does not say what its purpose is, only that it is of dwarf origin. Very good. Supposedly a song of this origin, perhaps sung in the morning, which gives strength to the gods and skill to the elves, so it could give this to humans as well when sung in the morning. It could be anything, really. Now, charms 16 and 17 are about love and the seduction of women, while the last charm, finally, in good Odinic fashion, is an enchantment that remains a secret, a mystery kept by Odin alone. Something that I should point out, or should be pointed out, is that many of the spells or charms have similarities with the description of the powers of this same deity, Odin, in chapters 6 and 7 of the Ynglinga saga, so you should check that, which tells us about themes such as extracorporeal travel, disabling weapons, and the control of elements such as flames and storms. As we saw previously, of the 18 enchantments, only one makes explicit reference to runes, that of the revived corpse, not counting the 6th charm, right? Which, although it mentions runes, that's true, the charm itself is to banish and protect from curses embedded with runes, and not actually a charm that uses runes or is chanted during the practice of using runes. Only the 12th really tells us about the use of runes. Of course, we can think that the 6th charm, hypothetically, since the text then talks about the root of a tree, through which the spell is executed with runes, perhaps the charm itself would also need the engraving of runes, accompanied by the sung charm as a form of counter curse, but this remains open. I must also say that, as we saw in these charms, we are dealing with the use of the voice or songs, a practice called galdr, but whose historical relationship with the runes is not entirely clear. We can perhaps only be face-to-face with spoken charms as phrases preserved in folklore and popular magical tradition, as spoken incantations that must accompany some type of practice. But obviously, it is possible that both runes and songs may have been distinct practices that at certain times may actually have been complementary. It is not an unreasonable hypothesis at all. However, looking at the Hávamál alone, just this source, there is no relationship between vocalization and writing in magic while doing magic. We are facing a period and a culture where poetry became an important form of expression. So it is more likely that these songs were in the form of poetry. This vocalization of the charms were poems, and consequently, Galbre itself, which was a form of magic, it also became the term for vocalizing and singing poetry. We are facing a medieval Nordic society in this context, which is mostly Icelandic. It is Icelandic, right? Western European medieval times are marked by a great focus on poetry. I also say this due to my own country, Portugal, which also in medieval times was marked by great poetic currents, and it is no coincidence that in the popular magical tradition, even today, still today in my country, poetry is a form of communication with certain supernatural beings, as sometimes we see in these 18 charms in the Hávamál. I would like to finish by just touching on a point that can be developed at another time, of course, not specifically about the runes, but also, in a way, but about the figure of Guido von List and the Volk movement, and all this modern occultism that has greatly altered the understanding of the runes and opened up a field of an entire story about esotericism and occultism using the runes from a political point of view, focused on racial aspects which distorted the entire history of the runes. This, of course, comes from a period in which the European collective mentality begins to change greatly due to a lot of historical factors, due to the French Revolution, for instance, Napoleonic Wars, and then industrialization, gods, changing the way European communities saw themselves, right, and governed themselves and thought about themselves, eventually giving rise to romantic nationalism, etc., etc. But for the case here, in this video, talking about the 18 charms, we have a set of romantic nationalist ideals, racist and misogynist ideologies, and a complete distorted historical invention that leads von List, Guido von List, to create the famous book of Das Geheimnis der Runen, The Secret of the Runes, which emerges from a revelation he had, and as he says, and I quote, revelation about hidden laws, or concealed hidden laws of generation and evolution of the Aryan people, their emotions, intellect, speech, and writing. In this book, the list of spells from the Eddic poem Hávamál, which we have dealt with here previously, are presented as an esoteric code of Aryan wisdom preserved by Icelandic poets. These poets, in von List's distorted vision and never based on history, were also singers, masons, carpenters, heraldists, philosophers, judges, and theosophists, because they formed the guild that was the origin of all arts and sciences. This and other fantasies form an integral part of the false history that was created around the runes and the Nordic peoples that still has a great impact today, unfortunately, especially on neo-pagan movements, and much of what neo-pagans think they know about the religion and customs and belief systems and mythology of the Norse past is false and originated in these 19th and 20th century movements. Be that as it may, leaving this subject for another time, in the book Secret of the Runes, each stanza of the list of spells corresponds to a character accompanied by a name, sounds, and associated words, even if without a etymological relationship, in a symbolic summary of the mystical content of the verses, usually about the ego, the divine, or the race and its preservation, right? For Liszt, runes were sacred symbols, hieroglyphs only later used as letters. It's a very common type of thinking even today, precisely due to the last 100 years of this type of romanticism that ends up unconsciously influencing people to see these types of patterns that don't actually exist when it comes to the actual history of the runes, but are inventions that have been repeated quite a lot. Be that as it may, the Hávamál has a list of 18 spells, but the new Futhark, which is the closest to that number, only has 16 characters. Therefore, list adds 2 extra runes to make the correspondence, quite forced correspondence, with his ideas and ideals, political ideals. He thus invented a false runic alphabet, which you can see right here on the screen, and I've probably shown you before as well, if I did not forget to edit that. Well, I can talk more about this subject and lists delusional inventions based on the political panorama of the time on another video, if you would like, of course. So please tell me about it in the comments below. But this is to say that a large part of the idea we have today of the 18 charms of the Hávamál being related to the runes, each one to a different runic character, it's a pure romantic invention, pure fantasy from the beginning of the 20th century. My dear friends, I hope this video was useful. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, tack för idag. Thanks for today. Obrigado por hoje. Until we meet again, my dear friends.